Hi, I'm Eric Lubau, and welcome to Beyond the Belt. This is a conversation with Toma Dragicevic, a black belt out of Ontario, Canada. Toma is a senior manager in corporate North America, as well as being the owner of a few gyms in Ontario, Canada. I hope you enjoy our chat. Hey, thanks for being here, Toma.
Thanks for having me, Eric. I'm really excited to get to know you a little more today and have a good conversation.
Cool. So before we dive right in, can you just pronounce your whole name? Because I feel like it's not one of the easiest to pronounce.
I'll use the what I call the Canadian version, so it's Toma Dragicevic.
Dragicevic. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. We'll see if I can butcher that a few times. So tell me, what was it like for you to get your black belt?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. So
Kind of the point.
I started jits in end of '99, beginning of 2000, and I'm well into my late 40s. I started, if I do the math right, around 23, I would say, and it was interesting. The way I actually got into jujitsu was getting put into a pretzel by a guy who knew jujitsu. At the time, I was training Muay Thai kickboxing at a former, actually partner of mine's gym, and this kid, his name was Mark Bocek. He actually fought in the UFC.
I remember Mark, actually.
Yeah, so he was living down with Hicks and Gracie in California, and he came up here with my first ever coach, Slavko Ilic, who was also purple belt under Hicks and Gracie at the time. Mark was a blue belt. I would guess he was maybe early teenager, maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. And they came to our gym to do a demonstration. And, I was probably in the best shape of my life at that point. So, they were like, who wants to go in the ring with Mark? I'll go. I'll take it easy on the kid, you know what I mean? And I got in there and man, he put me in pretzel after pretzel after pretzel. So I was hooked from that day moving forward. I knew there's no lying about that. I felt it firsthand. So I started training at that point, late '99, early 2000s. And it was interesting time in Canada for jiu-jitsu because the highest instructor on average was a blue belt. So it was very, very new in the country. We would train, I think we had about three classes a week that you had to pick from. And we were training out of a judo club. I started under Hickson with Slavko, and then he kind of went AWOL, and I ended up learning under Professor Scott Schilling at that time. So, I got all my belts from Professor Scott. And like I said, we were training 2, 3 days a week. We would fly down to California, go train with Hickson. We'd go to Henzo's in New York. So it was a lot of, we would pay a lot of money to go train with a brown belt somewhere, right? Because it was just a lot different than it was today. So fast forward a couple years, went through all the belts, ended up getting my black belt in 2011, 2010, 2011. And then, yeah, just I ended up affiliating shortly after that with Hobson Mora. So he's my professor today, 8-time world champion. Everybody's well aware of Hobson. So yeah, I've been kind of doing that journey for the last decade under Professor Mora, and today I've got two of my own gyms, Current BJJ and Revo Jiu Jitsu. It's funny because I look at myself as the dad of the gyms because all my partners are, well, I call them kids. They're not kids anymore that grew up under me, and now we're partners in gyms together, which is really cool. And I mean, for me, the satisfaction out of all this is, my time's kind of, as much as I still do it and I love it and I teach, my time's come and gone, and I love seeing, the people that we brought up taking over now and doing what I've done over the last 20 years, owning gyms and whatnot. So yeah, it's been quite a long journey. Jiu-jitsu's changed a lot along the way, the sport aspect of it, the
Well, what did
self-defense.
it like? I want to go back. Like, I do want to get to all of that, but like, what did it feel like for you when you got your black belt? Because you clearly were not like there wasn't anywhere near the number of people. You must have felt a little bit. You must have felt set apart a little bit.
Yeah, at that time there was a lot more of what I call the wow factor, right? Like I have, I think 15 black belts under me right now. So you kind of get numb to what used to be. You forget about it. I remember when I got my black belt, I call myself kind of like the second generation of black belts in Canada. And I mean like a year or two from the first generation. I was always like one belt under my instructor. And I remember, all the years leading up to black belt, we'd go train with black belts, and it's like you found this unicorn, and it's teach me all these magic tricks that you have, and then you get there, and you put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. You don't feel that like that person, but other people look at you like that. So it was kind of hard to kind of compartmentalize all the different emotions when it happened, because you just feel like the normal person and everyone's looking at you and putting you on a pedestal. And I'm not like that, where I don't like that attention. I think we're all human, and it's about sharing the art. But I remember that day. I did my black belt grading old school, where it was a 45-minute demonstration, blindfolded self-defense, Shark Tank, the entire school lining up for 1 hour, 2 minutes, or tapping out. All the white belts were looking at you like fresh meat. And I remember every one of them when they came at me really, really hard. But I remember I couldn't walk off the mats that day. I was so cramped up. And, it was the old school methodology, which I don't do anymore. But I kind of relate it, Eric, to today's world of pre-internet and post-internet, right? It's like two different worlds. And doing jiu-jitsu and being on the journey to black belt, call it in the earlier 2000s versus now, it's a totally different landscape. You earn it a different way. I remember we didn't have the internet when I was going through all my belts. I'd have like 3 VHS tapes, and I'd be watching the same Mundials over and over and over again. And the access that everybody has to the internet now is incredible and scary all at the same time, because they have resources that they're not quite capable of understanding, which kind of creates a lot of bad habits sometimes. But it was pretty nostalgic back in the day. That day I'll never forget. I feel like I earned it in a different way, in a different time. And, sitting here telling stories like that, there's probably people that are going to listen to this and be like, I don't even believe that. But, it was like that. And I'll never forget when I got my purple belt, it was at a seminar. Professor Silvio Bering was in town, and there was 400 people at this event. And I walked the gauntlet through the entire seminar. So, if for people out there that have witnessed the whippings of belt ceremonies, it was a different level back then, and there was no holding back. Let's just put it that way.
So, did you ever want to put anyone else through that kind of black belt test, or as soon as you had the opportunity, you're like, I'm changing this?
Yeah, I had no interest in it. I have a different philosophy when it comes to grading. It might be similar to many people, but different from others. If you're a student, I'm observing you every single day in and day out when you're on the mats. And through your training, you are earning your stripes, you're earning your belts. And if you're a good instructor, in my opinion, your ability to assess students all the time, every day, is kind of a talent, but it's also a necessity, because they're earning it by coming to practice, coming to training, by doing the drills, doing the warm-ups, whatever it is. I don't believe that on a certain day they just got ready for that day and now they can show me that they're ready. They've earned it through their commitment. And we'll do grading days, but the grading day is a ceremony versus an actual show me what you know, and we'll pretend like I don't know what you really know.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to do it too. I feel like watching students all the time, I kind of know what they're progressing, where they're struggling, and it's easier on them to not add the additional pressure of performance, right? It's like grading for some people, at least the way I've heard them talk about it, feels like competition. And if you don't want to compete and you have to do it at the grading, it's like an unnecessary stressor for a hobby.
The one thing I will say though is, with the kids program, we'll do a grading and we will do guided like techniques, like let's all, do a triangle or put on an arm bar, and an instructor will demonstrate it and the kids kind of get to show the parents what they know. It's a little bit of a different dynamic, I think, but
Katas
it's
for
not, it's
jujitsu.
not a pressure way.
It's like katas for jujitsu.
It is. I hate to say that, but yeah, kind of.
I'm
But
a former
it's
Taekwondo
also,
guy too, so it's funny to me.
yeah, it's also for the parents as well, right? They see where their investments are going. They don't always get to watch class and whatnot, so it's a little bit of a ceremony for them. I'd say more than the kids. The kids are so ready for the couple things we'll ask them to show that they know with their inside out with their eyes closed. But with the adults, it's definitely something earned during the blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah. What's changed for you as you've gotten older? I mean, you've been in this for a long time. Like what do you do differently, now that you're getting closer to 50 than, when you were doing this in your late 20s, early 30s?
Um, yeah, I do a lot of things differently.
Yeah.
Maintenance, I would say, is the biggest thing. I've had hip replacement. I've had many injuries. You don't recover at 49 like you used to. I would say I train a lot smarter, where before it was almost like the lion's den. We'd all go in there, we're teammates, but it was a brawl all the time because you're proving your manhood or your ability to scrap, for lack of better terms. But with age, it's kind of like my example, Eric, around my black belt grading. When the white belts lined up on the wall, they saw a black belt tired and cramping up, and this was their time to go get them, right. Like, you get a lot of that in these classes. You get a 22-year-old kid who's just at a university and is a football athlete or wrestling athlete and is very strong, and they want to see how good they are against a black belt, right? Because you're this unicorn that doesn't exist everywhere, and you gotta shut that down. And I call it old man jujitsu or sloth
Yeah.
jujitsu,
I
where
love that.
love pulling my half guard and getting some grips and shutting the big powerful kids down. But I know that if I go scrap 7 or 8 of them during rolls in class, tomorrow morning is going to be a different day at work than if I'm playing a lot smarter. So I also really believe that with age you learn how to learn, if that makes sense. And
Could not agree with you more. I
yeah,
absolutely agree with that.
the things like an 18-year-old purple belt can comprehend without the life experience and the learning how to learn, versus a 42-year-old purple belt is very, very different, right? The laws of physics are perceived differently or understood differently. Consequences are seen and perceived differently. There's a whole list of things. So definitely with age, you become a lot more aware of consequences, repercussions, longevity, and just, I think to myself, I was training last night and woke up a little sore today. I went a little bit harder, but I know I'm in class again tonight. Probably going to take it a little easier and be a little more cognizant of who I'm picking to roll with or saying yes to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I do the same thing. I'm not almost 50, but I'm in my mid 40s, and we got some big folks at the gym, and like I might train with them. I might do one hard round, and then I'm like, okay, the rest of these rounds are smaller white belts, so I don't overtax my body since I'm going to be back here tomorrow, kind of a thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, you and I were talking earlier, and you're teaching a class of 45 people, and as an instructor and doing a service to the gym, you kind of got to get around to everybody, right? So with age, and keep me honest here if you think the same way, but I'll never avoid anybody. Like, I will make sure that I roll with everybody, but I make sure that it's in the right scale, and it's spread apart properly, because again, back to what we're able to do in our late 40s versus somebody in their mid 20s is very, very different, just from a pure physical standpoint.
I completely agree. One of the things that I try to preach much more now than I did when I was younger is like I try to talk more about tapping. Like I try to talk to people more about like, hey, sometimes I will tap not because like you have the submission on or whatever. You might just be going hard, and I'm not willing to go that hard with you. And if I feel like you're not controlling it or slowing down or whatever, I'm going to use that as a teaching moment that I, as a coach, feel like I can take the opportunity to do. Be like, hey, this tap is not because you got me. It's because I want you to understand that you can use this moment of going with somebody who is technically reasonably proficient, reasonably, and you can go a little bit lighter. And if you get something, I'm going to give it to you. I'm not going to fight like hell, but I need you to be able to go with me in that way. So when you're going with someone smaller, you can, you can take care of them and yourself. And that's not something I did in my, late 20s, early 30s. I'd be like, all right, we're doing this. It's on. And now I'll just tap and be like, hey, let's take it down a notch.
Yeah, I have the same philosophy, and I say it in class often. You know, there are days where it's not even days. Like every single role is very different depending who I'm with and understanding where they're at in their journey, and what they need to work on. Sometimes I will like literally just let my legs flop to the side and let them get side control, right? And now let's play from here. And I'll turn it up a little bit just to give enough resistance. But what I always tell my students and I tell my, student instructors is if you're, let's say you're a purple belt and you're one of the higher belts in the class, depending on the school, and your instructor is a black belt, and they are just beating on you every single time from top position, mount, back, side control. When are you ever going to learn how to attack from side control? Or when are you ever going to learn like what it feels like at a high level to have somebody in a position that you've dictated rather than they've dictated, right? So if you're my student and let's say you're the highest rank in the class, and when you and I roll, I never let you get my back. You're never going to feel like what black belt back defense is, right? And when you do feel it, you're going to do the trial and errors that I call learning, rinse and repeat and drill it over and over again. And then you get that aha moment. Oh, I remember feeling this. He was dipping out the back when I did this last time. I'm going to change this grip. So I think it's really important to make sure that your students know that you want to let them play with you properly. Because that is where that ego separation is. Because if you got that constant ego, it's going to be detrimental to your students' progression. And if that happens, you're not doing anybody a service. In my case, I'm already getting up there in age. I've already got my black belt. I'm getting my 4th degree in a couple months. And, I've done my time. My job is to be here and make the students do this, right? Because it's their time. So I really can kind of understand where you come from with that, because a lot of time you'll hear smack talking on the internet. Oh, I passed my professor's guard, or I choked them. Just understand that they're letting you get in that position. And if you got your professor from, let's say a rear naked choke, odds are they probably weren't fighting too hard to get there, and you did a really good job of demonstrating good technique when you got there, and that's why you got them, right? That's the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I also tell people, like, because sometimes people get a little annoyed and they're like, oh, you just let me walk past your guard. And I'm like, yeah, but it's because I'm practicing something, right? So like you can get to this point and then I'm going to defend this thing. So like if that's what you want to attack and test yourself on, like then test yourself there. But,
Right.
I need to make sure that I get my own training in. And sometimes that works from like me giving up something in order to play in a specific position. So,
Yeah, that's why I really find positional sparring super valuable, where you can just like reset, rinse, and repeat in a certain position over and over, and that kind of stimulates the mind enough to create that it becomes instinctive versus having to think about it for too long, and that kind of mitigates a little bit of that need to just be giving up positions as well.
yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you about with is your hip. By the way, you said you got a hip replacement. Was that related to jujitsu or was that unrelated?
I would say unrelated. That's probably the jury's probably out on that, but I think there's
contributory.
definitely some genetic components. So I have a brother who's 5 years older than me by 50. He had both of his done. Never did
Okay.
jujitsu a day in his life. My surgeon says I played very, very high level hockey all my life, and he said that hockey is probably the worst motion. Skating is the worst motion for your hips possible.
It's
But the
unfortunate
reality
for
is
all
probably a lot
Canadians.
of it was predetermined, and hockey and jujitsu probably expedited the inevitable process.
Yeah, I get that. How long were you out for when you had that?
Man, you won't believe it. So I got my hip done. It's been about almost 3 years now. Actually, just a little over 3 years now. And I got the procedure done. It's the new technology. They call it the anterior approach. So historically, when you would do your hip, they would cut you open from behind through the glutes and cut through the muscles. So recovery was a nightmare. Often, like the muscle therapy or recovery, but also the infections were really prominent. Where now they use this technique where they kind of cut right just under my where my hip flexors are at the front. So I probably have like a 6 inch scar. And what they do is they just clamp the muscle open so they don't cut anything, and then they perform the surgery. So I walked out on a walker the same day. And yeah, and the most invasive part of the recovery was letting the stitches heal, like letting the scar heal properly. So within a month, I was, on the bike and getting cardio in. I would say 2 months I was on the mat, 3 months I was going pretty hard on the mats.
That's absolutely insane. That's
Insane.
I, I mean, the main crux of my question was how did you handle the time off? Because I was expecting you to tell me it was like a year or something, but even 3 months is a good hefty time off. Like, how did you handle that, or were you just
So
mired in the recovery?
it's interesting because coincidentally all of this happened during COVID. So COVID in Canada was a different animal. It was 2.5 years. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't train. So to paint the picture, my hip is bummed. I can't even tie my right shoelace. That's how bad it was. So ready to seeing the doctors, talking about surgery, and then COVID happened. So like March 2020, I remember everything shuts down. My gyms, the weightlifting gyms, and my hip's already crap. So I can't run because I won't sleep at night if I try and run, and it's just bone on bone. The gyms are closed. I have a treadmill in the basement I can't use, and then everything that I used to do for fitness just kind of went away. On top of that, I couldn't do anything at home because my hip wasn't conducive to it. And then it was like the waiting game. So, we probably did a lot of backdoor jits, is what I'll call, and, unlock the back door, which I'm glad we did. But during that time, I probably gained like 25 pounds because all of my fitness avenues were gone. Sitting at home, you're working from home, everyone's online, you're picking at the fridge all the time, but I'm still, I'm eating as if I'm a full-time athlete, right? Like playing hockey, soccer, jujitsu, like I've done all of my life. So then I get into this, a year of COVID passes, and you feel like crap because you're not training, you're gaining weight. I've always been known as kind of the fit guy, and that's not my MO anymore. And you kind of start getting in your head. And finally, the hospitals opened up to a point where I could book my surgery. So I got my surgery done kind of on the back end of COVID. And then it was like, I've been off for so long already. Those 3 months were irrelevant to me. For me, I wanted my sanity back because
Yeah.
like if especially the fitness part of it, but even maybe more so the jujitsu part of it, when that's not a part of your life and it normally is all the time, there's a big void, right? I describe it almost like midlife crisis of jujitsu or fitness, where it's like everything you kind of stood for and believed in and loved and had passion for is gone.
Yeah.
You have no choice, but it's not at your reach anymore. And then you're going through this process now, right? So there was a lot of residual around that, and COVID was a big part of it, which really, really sucked. But man, when I was able to get back on the mats, I tell my wife it was like a new lease on life. I felt like there was this monster void that was kind of filled again. But then you start going through the process, right? Because you're starting slowly, you're starting to drop the pounds, you're starting to get back up with your jiu-jitsu, and then throw another kind of wrench in there is as soon as I was on the mats for maybe a month, and then I tear my meniscus. So uh, it was interesting because when I asked the surgeon, he's like, "Well, you gotta think about this. Your hip was so locked up, you had no range of motion. All your tendons were shortening up. All of a sudden, you do the surgery, and your range of motion is huge, but nothing can support the range of motion, right? So meniscus tears, and thank God that's not very invasive. It was a couple days and then maybe a month recovery, but." Yeah, that the whole saying, when it rains, it pours. It was
Yeah.
pouring. That's for sure.
That's so interesting. Like the reason I like to ask the question is because injury in jujitsu is inevitable, and not everybody has the same tactic for uh, getting through it. Like everybody has different strategies. Some people are like, oh, well, I'm going to learn a new language or I'm going to pick up drawing, and like they pick up a new skill. And some people are like, I'm going to sit on the side of the mat and watch. And I'm like, you're crazy. I can't do that.
Yeah, that's
So I
torture.
just, yeah, exactly. It's torture. So I like to ask people for what their strategies are, how they got through it. But you just kind of lucked out with the timing.
Yeah, no, it totally did. It goes back though to that longevity piece though, right? Like even it's hard to say this because I love jujitsu so much, but if you don't do it carefully early, it's more detrimental to you physically than it is beneficial.
Yeah,
And
I would agree with that.
it's I see 28-year-olds with jacked necks and their backs are out, and they're all the ones that you see in class. There's no filter, right? It's 100%, go as hard as you can every single time. Getting a guillotine, I'm not tapping, I'm pulling it out, and it's just like people's ears, right? Like it's
Yeah.
almost like a medal of honor to have all these cauliflower ears, where I'm the opposite. I don't want it, A, and B, that means you just use bad technique somewhere. So
Yeah.
there's that whole philosophy around that. And if there's one thing I tell, even like I think about the kids now, and my sons both train jujitsu as well, but we have some killer kids in one of my gyms that are like Pan Am champions, and they started when they were 4 or 5 years old. And I think to myself, like, can you imagine if you could start at that age? I started in my early 20s because it wasn't around, right? And now you
Yeah.
have that. But then I think to myself too, like, we got to take care of these kids, because a lifetime of this from that age, if they're not training smart, making sure that they're taking care of themselves physically and nutritionally, that's a lifetime toll of physical stress, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a double-edged
Double-edged
sword in
sword.
my
Yeah.
opinion, and a mixed bag of emotions, because I love it, but I also cringe at the what can be if we don't, make sure that they're aware of the repercussions of it.
I'm not like that, but I've been doing martial arts for like high 30 years, like close to 40 years between taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, MMA, Muay Thai, wrestling. Like I've been doing martial arts almost nonstop since I was about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. And my body has taken a beating and I did not take good care of it. So I have to like slow down more at this age than I want to.
So let me ask you a question, Eric. What, doing taekwondo and multiple different martial arts, obviously jujitsu, I know you did wrestling.
Yep.
What took the biggest toll on you?
Wrestling, hands down.
Really?
Wrestling, because we didn't know how to weight cut. So I would be, having like ice chips and orange peels for like 3 days in a row to make weight. And then I would make weight. I would, after like 2, 3 hours of practice and weightlifting, so not giving my body the recovery protein it needed at the very least. And then we'd have a match, and then I'd have another match 2 days later. So I would, need the water, need the recovery, and then I wouldn't really fully recover. And it was just absolutely brutal. Like that was the worst. That was the absolute worst.
Do you feel that, there's that nutritional toll that it has a more physical toll, probably like spine and neck over other martial arts, or do you find it was it more of a moment in time because of the way you were competing?
I think it was so I weirdly one of the things that I think is really interesting about wrestling is that you can do it in a lot of different ways. In the same way you can do jujitsu in a lot of different ways. Everybody that I trained with had this like double leg, like blast double, go hard kind of thing about them. Like it was like what I call the athletic style of wrestling. I'm not super athletic and I never have been. And so everything that I did for wrestling was to avoid being athletic. And so I didn't do the million neck bridges and I didn't blast double and throw my head in somebody's sternum. I saw people doing that and I'm like, oh, well, if I can just make them miss, I can like duck under or I can like John Smith single. And like all my tactics ended up being things that didn't put an undue amount of pressure and strain on my body. And it was dumb luck. Like I didn't do it intentionally thinking, oh, I need to take care of myself. But my style of wrestling still works for me now in my 40s. And it doesn't require the level of athleticism that, I see a lot of wrestlers being forced to continue to do. Not that athleticism is bad. It's just my style happened to be conducive to like sloth old man jujitsu kind of stuff. So,
Yeah,
but it's
use
still
the
the
laws
most
of
damage I
physics
took.
versus the body.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing, though. If you could teach somebody that early on, that's golden.
That's how I teach wrestling now. Like we've got a great wrestling coach at my gym, but he teaches athletic wrestling. And so every time I end up teaching some of those classes or I teach one of the takedown classes, everyone's like, we never do stuff like this. And I'm like, well, I was an All-American, so it's not like I'm teaching from a place of this stuff doesn't work. It's just a different style.
Yeah, I kind of relate that to the modern day jujitsu versus old school jujitsu when it was self defense versus sport, and back in the day there was both built in together. Where now it's separated so much just because of the rule set and whatnot, and kind of as an offering as an academy, you really need to be able to teach a little bit of all of it and kind of bring it all together, or there's going to be gaping gaps, right? So,
Yeah. You said you had two academies, and you're under Hobson Mora. Like, what do you think about associations these days? I mean, with the advent of the internet and all this stuff being available, like, do you feel like associations serve the same kind of purpose, or is it kind of a legacy thing for you?
uh, yes and no. I again, I got mixed emotions about that as well. I think finding the right fit is key, and the definition of fit may be different for everybody, right? So I was around, I've been around long enough to know what I call the bad business days, where, you would bring in a professor from wherever, usually certain countries, and it was a very fast cash grab, right? Like you would get your money's worth, but there was no business acumen around, hey, if I do this now, the next time I come here is more lucrative and I can build this and have like a long-term vision versus the in the moment grab it and run. Is the way it used to be, and those are the associations that I have zero interest in. Been around them, seen them, still see them. For me, when I was in the Silvio Bearing Association for many, many years under the professor that I was with for the longest time. And he had actually separated from that association, and I was just loyal to him. So we were kind of agnostic for a long time. And then I kind of met a couple people in the Hobson Mora affiliation, and it felt like family, right? Hobson's my professor. I train with him probably a week a year. My jujitsu doesn't come from him. My classes aren't with him, but my loyalty is with him. And the support that he gives me, my students when he's here, a valid lineage. But, every October I go down to Tampa where he lives, headquarters, and we'll have like 200 people from around the world would come for our annual camp. Then I got so close with Hobson that he asked me to kind of run RMNU Canada, which I do. And so now in June, I run a Canadian camp. So there's 5 sister schools in Canada under Hobson Mora. I run it at my school, and all the schools come together, and there's probably another 50 to 75 people come from the US, and we bring in Hobson, his son, Jeff Mitchell out of Delaware. A couple other instructors have come over the years. We'll use some of our local black belts, and we do a camp. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 9 to 4. We have a lunch break. It's instructional. I know you're, Globetrotter guy. Same thing as your camps. You go there, and it's as much jiu-jitsu as your heart can desire, or take as much as you want and leave and come back whenever you want, right? There's no, it's not militant. That's the best word I can use, where I've seen other associations, and I won't name them, but you are branded to a T. All of your merchandise needs to come from HQ. Like,
Yeah.
it is the business first and the people second. And you and I talked before, like, even in my day job, I get the most gratification from people, and I like to have that in the schools as well. And when there's a camaraderie when we get together, or even within singular schools, for me that is what creates an experience for people. And that's why I've stayed very loyal to Hobson. I love him. He gives me as much autonomy as I want, but we have a mutual respect. I know his kids, I know his wife, I go to his house. There's not a lot of lineages or affiliations where you're going to be able to go do that, and that means a lot to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's more just a general philosophy question, because associations come with such baggage these
Well,
days as a
for me,
result
the
of some of
baggage
those
is the
things.
IBJJF. So that's a whole
Yeah,
nother
that's a whole different.
scam on its own.
Yeah, I very much agree with you that the IBJJF is a huge problem. Any organization that doesn't really recognize 10th Planet as having good grapplers is a big problem. But yeah,
They're detrimental to the sport, in my opinion.
agreed.
But they have such a monopoly on it that, eventually I think it'll change. But, there's been a lot going around on the internet lately around athletes being paid versus paying to go. Like, it's crazy that Mika Galvao is paying an entrance fee to go fight an
Yeah,
IBJJF tournament, or whoever, Roberto Jimenez, or all of these big names. Um, it's bananas.
yeah. I want to talk about your job, right? Like you said, one of the things we talked about off camera was that you really love what you do for work. So like, can you talk a little bit about that? What does the general manager of an industrial supply company do? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's big corporate world, right? Like, they call it corporate America, and I'm part of a global kind of overarching umbrella association, and I run one of our subsidiary companies in Canada. So like, my job is really everything head to toe in the company, Eric. So it's the sales organization runs up to me, marketing, operations, literally everything. So for people in the business world who know what a P&L is, it's basically a profit and loss statement that I'm responsible for. How much money did we make, and what was the profit of it? Did we grow year over year? Did we hit our targets? I love the big corporate life. I can't lie. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the intensity of it, the accountability of it, the challenge of climbing that corporate ladder, whatever it is. I just love it, and it's something that a lot of people said, "You're crazy. Why are you going through all of the craziness of corporate North America when you can just have your couple jiu-jitsu schools and live off of that?" And I was like, you know what? It gives me just as much satisfaction in my day job as it does running schools. And I've always done both, and I've always loved doing both. But I love the people aspect of my day job, right? Like, really finding talent, cultivating people. You're kind of like, it's a terrible term, but like a puppet master of, how do we, if Eric moves here, who do we bring in there? Then, what's
Yeah,
that person's backfill going to look like? And you get to be the strategist of an entire company, an organization, and you have big teams around you that, you give guidance to and direction, and they report back, and you're building things and you're executing and deploying. I love that whole, some people will call it the rat race, but I would probably think that if I was born a different generation, I'd be diagnosed with some ADHD. But that's my way of staying busy. Like, I like busyness. I don't like boredom. I can't be in a lull, and that gives me as much busyness between that, couple schools, 3 kids, a wife, and a home. It's a lot, definitely.
I'm actually quite similar. I love being busy, like I have a full-time corporate job. I teach jujitsu on the side. I do this podcast for fun, and I also like being busy. But I think one of the things you said that's interesting that really resonated with me is that you like doing the puppet master thing. And I think that I don't like the term either, but it's like quite an accurate representation. And the thing that I like about having your own P&L, and I remember the first time I was handed like a P&L and was like, okay, all decisions here are yours, is it's this concept for me of structured creativity. And I find that everything that I like to do is structured creativity. Jiu-jitsu, here's the rules, here's what the body can do. The other person, you versus them, structure, be creative within that structure. And when I was handed a P&L, it was like, okay, figure out how you can get the most done, pick your goals, and now get everything to be as optimized as possible. Move the people around, get them better, like find a new person if it makes sense, that kind of a thing. Like,
No, it's
how did that change your life when you got handed that P&L and L and got out of just having sales?
You know what? It's funny because I've worked in operations, I've worked in sales. My company's very big on cross pollination, and the theory is take somebody with great competencies, and you could put them anywhere, and they will contribute with those competencies versus the experience, right? So I've led sales organizations. I've had brick and mortar of buildings that we transact out of. I've done sales effectiveness where I create the strategies that's going to go to market. And then all of a sudden, whichever job you've done in the past, it was this bubble, right? It was a big bubble that was one variable of many bubbles. And then it went up to the top. And then all of a sudden, you become the top. And now you are asking every leader of those bubbles or those functions, what's working and what's not working. If it's working, how do we make it even better? If it's not working, where are the gaps? Need you to go figure this out, come report back to me in a month. And then on the you're kind of a jack of all trades that all bubbles up to that P&L that we talk about, right? But it's now you're never in a bubble. You're looking at all the bubbles as kind of that puppet master term that we used, and seeing, where do I need to go help, and where do we have something broken? What's working well? How do we capitalize even more on it, right? So you kind of become overarching is the way I describe it. I say I look at everything at 10,000 feet, and then I zoom in where, it's like being that eagle in the air, and you see that little spot and you got to go in and go fix that, right? So that's the biggest difference, is figuring out how to get really good leadership under you so that you've got the right people in the right roles. I'm able to delegate through those people and trust that they're going to do the right things. And then when we bring it back together, we get to put it all in a nice package and put a bow tie on it.
That's interesting. The thing that I really enjoy the most about that is I like taking the people and doubling down on their strengths, right? It's that old like McKinsey philosophy of you double down on your strengths, not try to focus on shoring up your weaknesses. I mean, it's a little bit more than that, but I like that. And the one thing that I spent way more time doing in the past 2 to 3 years than I've done previously is training the managers to be better managers. Because that's the one thing that I think you cannot compromise on. And so I do, every 2 weeks I do a people manager training, and we focus on different things from feedback, prioritization, motivation, dealing with, demotivation, having hard conversations. And I found that has gotten me the absolute most bang for my buck in terms of increasing like how effective people are and how enjoyable people find their work.
It's interesting you say that. And in my organization, we just went through twice a year, once a year we do engagement surveys, and then we do a pulse check in between. And we just went through ours. And, when I took over this company, I saw an opportunity to do exactly what you just said, right? The frontline leaders, and I think it was a lot to do with historical management. A lot of the frontline leaders didn't feel empowered. It was do as you're told and don't ask questions, where my style of leadership is very transparent and authentic. And you need to know how you contribute to the overarching goals and strategy of the organization, and feel free to have the autonomy to do that, but also know that our hand is up if you need help to do it, right? And we just got to a point where the leadership really feels like it's one leadership team versus senior leadership, and then just the managers. They feel like they're part of the strategy. They feel like they're contributing. We're pulling in, their direct reports to do stretch assignments so that they're engaged in the business. And all of this long-windedly just to make the point that if you can get the leaders to be bought in to the strategy and the vision, it's infectious. That'll radiate.
Yeah.
But if you don't have it bought in, there's no way anybody under them will be bought in either. And then you create that cancer. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. It is one of the most important things, is to get buy-in from all leadership. Once you do that, it's scalable, right? And that's one of the biggest things. But going back to what you asked before, all of that is kind of like what I call reverse engineering the P&L, right? So the company I'm in right now, we're very heavily indexed in automotive. And automotive, with the tariffs right now and everything going on politically, there's a huge impact, right? So, you need to try and explain financial acumen to people in a way where, hey guys, top line sales are going to be down 10% during all of these tariffs. How do we fix our operating expenses so that our operating earnings or operating income comes out net neutral, right? So that is one of the things like I love most about what I do, is you're pulling on all kind of different levers to get to what's after the equal sign. And you've got that autonomy to do it however you feel fit. It could be through headcount, it could be through expenses, T&E, whatever, SG&A, all those different variables, but you kind of become like that puppet master of the P&L. And hey, we can't control this, but we can control this, so let's focus on that to mitigate that. And to me, that's the everyday excitement about what I do and the responsibilities I have, from both a revenue perspective, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, but also hundreds and hundreds of people as well, right? And how do you find that balance?
How do you like to do the goal setting, right? Like my thing is, I really like OKRs, and I do them slightly differently than I've ever really seen anybody do them. But like I can go into that if you're interested, but like how do you normally do that goal setting? Do you use like SMART goals? Do you do OKRs? Do you do something different?
We use the SMART methodology for sure. I like to take it in phases and milestones of the hierarchy. So what I like to do is I create mine, and my goals are business goals, right? And then let's say I have my director of operations. Based on what's in my goals, my SMART goals that have influence by the ops team, I want then him to go one layer deeper of my operation goals to make those his goals. Then my sales director will take my goals and go one layer deeper. Then when they go to their district managers or whatever titles under them, they take it one level deeper, right? So once you get to the bottom of it, you're very metric, KPI, and behavior based within the goals, so that, one of the big things with me is everybody can have a bluebird year, right? Like maybe the economy's booming and you're at 110% with your eyes closed. People are taking half the week off and the revenue is just pouring. But then the goals need to be substantial enough so that the behaviors now kick in, right? Because the reason of goals is to measure. And you do your mid-year evaluations and your year-end evaluations. And if I'm evaluating you, Eric, and you're an account manager and you're at 120% of goal, but you've got a rotten attitude, you come to the meetings late, you're always late to hand things in, we can weigh the performance or offset the performance with the behaviors and not then have to get into that kind of HR struggle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I totally get that. The interesting thing that you said to me is the thing that I also try to avoid with SMART goals, which is if you have, call it 6 layers, 7 layers underneath you, then you end up in this position where you're like, okay, here's my SMART goals, and then the people under me, my directs, set their goals off of mine. And once you get like 4 layers down, everything is just copying the person above, and it kind of kills autonomy. And so this is like a thing that I try to avoid pretty heavily. Like, how do you deal with the enabling autonomy or ensuring autonomy while still sort of having your goals met? Do you like give instruction about that differently?
I lead very autonomously. For me, I've said it already to you in this conversation. The biggest problem is if you don't have the right person in the right role. If I don't have the right person in the right role under me, it's bad on me. I need to fix that first. Once I do have the right structure, the right people in the right roles under me, there are things that, especially from a KPI or a numbers perspective, that we just need to hit as a company. Everything outside of that is your full autonomy. And there's, when they bring them back to me and say, hey, here's what I came up with, we'll go over them together and I'll see if there's any like holes. And for me, a hole is risk. Everything that, I look at is risk mitigation, right? Because goals are set to measure people and measure performance and measure behaviors. And if there's holes in the goals and I'm doing a performance review with you or like maybe 5 layers down or having a performance, they can use that loophole to say, hey, you need to give me an exceeds. And with that comes a 5% merit bonus because I exceeded and here it is. Well, but you really didn't do this. Yeah, but look at the goals. This is what you asked me to do, and this is what I'm doing, right? So my job is to really make sure that I help them to make sure that they haven't left any holes open. But I leave a lot of autonomy for my leaders to do that. And then especially when it comes a layer under that leader, if the leader above them is the right person in the right role, they will have that competency and skill set to be able to poke the holes at that level, right? So you need to trust a lot. But the trust comes from putting the right people in the right roles and not having any reason to doubt them. If you have reason to doubt them, they're probably not the right person in the right role.
Yeah, that's really fair. When you run into sort of these KPI-driven situations, do you or exercises, do you take it down to the individual? Like, do you have individual goals? Or do you stop it at the team level or something like that?
No, we take it down to the individual. As you can appreciate, and I hate using the word down because I don't like preaching hierarchy. I think people are people, but it's a reality in the org chart, we'll call it. Further you go down in the org chart, some people's responsibilities are packaging a box on time. Right? So the weighting of the KPI becomes so low versus the behavior piece, right? And then as you go up the org chart, I would say it starts switching. So, you as a regional leader who has a team of 15 under you, your team goals are going to be very, very heavy. The people goals are going to be a lot more, everybody gets painted with the same brush. And then the higher up you go, the more the KPI becomes important and how you got there is from a team roll up rather than an individual roll up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I ask because I try to avoid the individual goals being pulled from the top. Like that to me always ends up being a problem because it feels oftentimes. So again, I use OKRs and I have them at the company level, departmental level, and then I stop at the team level because I don't want people having objectives and key results that are such specifically driven by the organization that it takes away from their feeling of autonomy and what they want to achieve. Because individual goals are great, but you can't really pull individual goals from team goals unless they're business driven. So for example, sales makes it really easy, right? You got a sales number you got to hit that goes down to the region, to the account manager. It's very clear that is like a individual goal. But if I want, somebody to be training to become a team lead, then there is no corporate goal that gets them there. And the individual goal doesn't make sense within that capability of the team. They'll probably be promoted diagonally or somewhere else, or they might leave the company to go take that leadership role. So my thinking is if I stop the goal setting at the team level, then anybody who's an individual can say, actually, I really want to learn to do this stuff. And now we can set individualized goals for them that are not tied to the team's goals or the department goals or something.
It's interesting because I totally get where you're coming from, and we use what we call IDPs, individual development plans, and that is kind of where that level would use an individual development plan to work towards something with their leaders. So I would sit down with you, hey Eric, I want to become a national account manager. I'm an account manager now. What are some of the competencies I should be working towards? Well, hey, Toma, you should go shadow a national account manager, probably do a little bit of networking with their leaders to understand what they're looking for. And then it becomes more of a study or a competency study is the way I would describe it, to get to there. So that is kind of how I think I bridge that gap. But for me at that individual contributor level, I agree with you. The numbers aren't as important. The big thing that's important is behaviors. And a lot of that, hey, if you're going to become a team lead, it is your behaviors. It's like going over and above. Are you engaged with the team? Does everybody like you? Do you get along with everybody, right? So it's those soft KPIs, as I would call them, that you don't really need to measure. They're organic every single day. And, you could survey your entire team and they'd all say, hey, Eric's the man, and nobody would ever question that you should be team lead. That's all behavior driven. So I like that idea of stopping the numbers at that team level and then switching over to the individual development plan.
Yeah, and I just want to jump on one thing you said, only because this is something that I feel very strongly about, the over and above thing. I am not a fan of expecting that people go over above what their job description is. If they want to, great, that's on you. But I try not to exceedingly reward that, because that sets the tone for saying, oh, we need people who are always going above and beyond. And I want people to be able to be effective at their job within the bounds of the job, right? It's right back to my thinking on structured creativity. It doesn't mean it's bad when people go above and beyond, but I want them to feel like they can be incredibly successful in that 40-hour work week or whatever it is. And if you want to go more, do extra, great, but that's not what I want to reward. I want to reward your efficiency within that time slot, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because for me it comes down to persona, and is it nature versus nurture, right? If you're just naturally somebody that goes over and above, it's not because you're looking for a promotion. That's just the way you're wired, right? And you can not be that person and do exactly what we ask and still get the same promotion, right? That's not a variable to me. When I was a district sales manager back in the day, I remember telling my team in a team setting, if I ask you for 100% of your number and you get to 101, and you can do that by working Monday through Thursday, and you don't want to go work Friday, you did what I asked you to do, right? I don't care if you're on the golf course every Friday and you're at 101, or every Thursday and Friday because you did it Monday through Wednesday. But know that if you add Thursday to your day, you could be at 110, and if you add Friday, you could be at 120. That's your prerogative. I asked you for 100, get me to 101. The rest is up to you, right? I just think that if I'm going to be honest, very quickly as a leader who are the ones that I call fly under the radar, and in most cases, there's a ceiling for those people because the aspirations are not high. It's, do bare minimum, and I'm okay with that. And that's fine. If bare minimum is what we asked you to do and you hit it, kudos to you. I'll take an entire company of that. But you need people that also aspire and have that kind of killer instinct, because not only are we doing, what the company is asking, we need to also evolve what the company already knows, right? So I'm a really big believer in bringing in people from the outside because outside training and perspectives brings new perspective into the organization. And that's almost like a free training ground, right? Like, hey, we used to do this and maybe we should try this. It's almost like a CI or continuous improvement mindset, right? And as long as you have a good balance of internal promotions and bringing people from the outside, I think that's a really healthy balance in a business to keep evolving and not become stagnant.
I really like the way you said that, actually. I I also prefer people who, if they want to work Monday through Thursday and they get the same amount of work done and they can deliver and they take Friday off, I'd rather have them do that. That I don't know if it's happening so much in like North America, but in Europe, there's like Belgium trials a trial to 4 day work week. There's a bunch of places in the UK that are doing it. In Germany, it's happening a little bit as well. I really like that because I find most people tend to be more effective working 4 days than they do working five. It's just the
My
way it
only
is.
question, and I'll ask you your opinion, is do you think at some point the novelty of that becomes diluted and saturated, and then you get that same quality again after after the initial excitement kind of wears off? Or do you think it is a matter of bandwidth and doing it in 4 days doesn't burn people out as much and they have more recovery time?
I think it's the latter. I have, I have probably 5% of my team works 4 days a week, and those 5% are almost all the most productive. And a lot of them did it initially for childcare, and they just stuck with it because they're like, I find I'm more productive. I have more time to recover. The sad part is that I can't pay them for the 5 days of work. And I just think that's sad because I feel like if they're delivering what I think is 5 days of work and I have to pay them for four because they're on the books for four, that to me feels like we're cheating people. But that's the side, that's the capitalism thing.
It is. It's also the nature of the business too, right? Because you can have salaried people that it's kind of like, close your eyes and do what you got to do in 4 days and you're hitting your numbers. I'm not going to really, but when you make it official and it becomes part of the structure, that's different. I think, I'm not sure. I'd assume in Europe it's similar, but the whole work from home fad during and after COVID kind of became that a little bit where like jobs in my organization that was in the office 5 days a week now is 3 days 1 week, 2 days the next week. And I find that is a really good balance for people that, especially I'm in the Greater Toronto area. The joke is when you're in Toronto, it takes you an hour to get to Toronto. So, when you can save those 2 hours in a day, even if you're not giving it back to work, but you can get the kids off to school in the morning and, you don't need the aftercare, and you've got those 2 hours back in your day that you're not sitting in a car for free or the train. I think it's really different from, just driving results perspective. But I also find that now people feel like self-entitled to it and they forgot that once upon a time their job was 5 days a week. And that's why I asked you that question.
I actually had somebody hand in a resignation a few days ago because they don't like remote work and they want to go find a job that is in office. So I think there is some self-selection going on for people optimizing for what they want and how they work better. But I think that it comes from the ability to be autonomous and make their own decisions, right? Like if they're empowered to make that decision for themselves, like forcing people to come back into the office, I have not seen have any success. Like it was tried at my company just before I got there. And they said, oh, we're paying for this office in London, like a bunch of people. And we had 5% of that office quit. Like, yeah, okay, self-select, but I don't like that's the option. I think if you want to work like that, in the Berlin office, which is where I am, people come in 1 day a week, and it's very healthy. Everyone enjoys that 1 day. It's like people have conversations. We get the water cooler stuff. People get the face to face. You build trust. You build some rapport, and then they work from home the other days, and it works incredibly well. But we have to pay for the office for the whole time. So it's like there is that constant trade off.
Right. There's that P&L again, right? There's the occupancy line that's a big expense, right? And you're trying to justify and balance the engagement and, how happy your people are, but you're also locked in a 10-year lease that you've got to justify, right? So
Yeah.
there is that balancing act for sure, but I think there's also a happy medium. Like I love when I go to the office and there's a full, floors of people and the energy is different. I really think it's different, but to your point, balancing it where it doesn't have to be like that all the time, but there's dedicated days that, let's get the energy and then go back to the virtual piece. I think that's where it's going to land here in North America is a hybrid model. I don't think it'll go fully virtually ever. Maybe like 10% of certain functions can do it that don't need to be in the office. But it's also, I'm thinking about it. It's also a way to optimize, brick and mortar costs, your occupancy costs, right? So when those negotiations do come up, do we really need 4 floors? Can we just go to 2? Put a bunch of money into the bottom line, keep the people happy, but also have that office banter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people who don't understand the value of that, like water cooler talk or the office banter,
So
or
much.
like it's why I sort of advocate for having a decent travel budget, because then I could put people in a room, even if it's like once a quarter. I get everybody in a room, like talk, realize that you're all humans, have a couple of pizzas, or whatever people want to eat, and shoot the shit, not talk about work, staring at a screen, and then remember that time, and you carry that with you for the next few months until you see each other again.
I ask all my functions, bring your teams together quarterly, go for a nice dinner, leave, have a couple drinks after, obviously, make sure you're safe and no one's driving, but there is so much value to that camaraderie where you can you can separate work and social, and when you have a little bit of social um, kind of friendship with the people that work, it's a different professional atmosphere as well, right? Like I always, people would ask me, and a lot of people come to me for like career advice, or I've seen what you've done. What are some tidbits you can give me or advice? And I'm like, you know what? Some of the greatest leaders I've ever worked for. Let me step back. First of all, you need to understand what motivates people, right? Is it money? Is it accolades? Is it promotion? Is it title? There's many different things, and personas drive that. And I said the best leaders I've ever had in my life are ones that I wanted to do a good job for, so that when I talk to them, they know I did a good job for them. They created an atmosphere for me that it was more important for me to be successful for them than it was for the bonus or anything else. If you could find a little bit of that in your leadership style, you're going to be a differentiated leader.
That's very well articulated. The way I often do that for people, or I try to do that for people, is I ask them how they feel like they've had a good day at work. Like, tell me what a good day at work looks like for you, and then we can sort of optimize for what looks like for them, and what we need to do for the company. And if they get to spend their day at work loving or feeling like they've had a purpose-filled day, or a successful day, and the company feels the benefit of that, then it's like, yeah, you did a great job, right? We aligned your goals and the company goals, and keep those people coming back in every day, kind of happy and feeling purpose driven.
I call success in the corporate world, you need to be a psychological ninja. And, the way I mean it, and it might sound self-serving, but it's really not meant to be. It doesn't matter what role I've ever held, and I'll just go back, think like when I was in sales running national accounts, and multi-million dollar contracts, and you go to the office and you have, a pretender named Sue, who's your analyst. And when the RFP is coming, they are head down for days and days and days and doing analysis and pricing. And I would come to the office, and all those people that had some sort of indirect alignment to me that supported me, I would go to every cubicle and just shoot the shit with them for 5 minutes. And bring some of the ones that I had better relationship with, or they've done a lot of work, and bring them a latte. Like, just, they're so underappreciated sometimes
Yeah.
because of the hierarchy BS that goes on. And my whole thing is we're people first, and then we're professional second. Man, not like I did that intentionally to get something, but the different response and the different willingness to support and help you when you give that human element to people that often they're in jobs that are very underwhelming, underappreciated, it flies under the radar, goes unnoticed. But for me, it's like, American football, they're the linemen. And if you don't create those holes, you're not getting a touchdown. And it's always the quarterback getting the glory. And when they get a little bit of acknowledgement and you just be a human and have some psychological awareness, man, that'll change your career.
That's why they call good, steady operation blocking and tackling, because
Yes.
it's the thing that the linemen
Yes.
are doing. Yeah,
Yep.
I completely agree. I think it's so interesting to hear you talk about it that way, because when I hear you say that, I hear like you're just checking in and remembering that we're people, and that's not a thing that most leaders do. And my approach is similar, but I kind of term it differently. Like, I don't love capitalism, but it is what it is. It's the place we operate. And so as long as I'm like, hey, I'm going to make this as as minimally shitty for you in a workday as I possibly can. And if you end up loving it, great. But let me just try to minimize how bad your workday can be by being honest about where we are, what we're doing, what you need to work on, what I need to work on, what the goals are, get us all aligned, get us all speaking the same language, on the same page, and try to do the best we can, knowing that even though you might like your job, this is not how you really want to be spending your time. It doesn't mean you don't enjoy it, but you probably want to be on the mats, under a car, hitting golf balls, like whatever, choking someone out, like whatever it is. Like I think that's the lineup I try for.
Yeah, I call that just authentic leadership. Like,
Yeah.
don't bullshit, don't corporate jargon it. Let them know why. Let them know how come they can't, and what are we going to do to enable it in the future and make it a better place incrementally every single day. You'll win people over like that, and that's just reality, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that is just, it's the same thing as seeing somebody at the supermarket and the cashier's there ringing in item after item after item. I can't imagine doing that for 10 hours in a day. And I'll read their name tag and I'll be like, hey, Eric, how you doing today? And they look at you like, nobody has said that to me today. And it's
Yeah.
like, how can you not take 2 seconds of your life to acknowledge somebody and be human with them?
Yeah. One of the stories that I like to tell around something like this is I'm just generally a social kind of person. I'm introverted, but I like being social.
I'm the same.
And my wife and I were out to dinner at this place in New York, and it was Hill Country Barbecue, and it's a little bit of a buffet style kind of thing, and you go up, you ask for the kind of meat you want. And I just started talking to this guy who was like cutting the meat and weighing it and whatever. And normally you weigh the meat, you get the meat plus the bone, and bone ends up being expensive. So I'm just talking to this guy, asking him how his day is, and he's like, "Oh, you look like this person." I'm like, "Well, you look like this person." We just had a quick back and forth, and he quickly chopped the bone out, weighed the meat, and handed us the thing without the bone in it. Instead of it being like a $65 cut, it ended up being like $25. And my wife's like, "How the hell do you just do?" And it's like I just enjoy that moment with somebody where you're like, you connect, and it's brief, and then you kind of
Yeah.
fuck off and go about your day, and they do the same.
Some of my best networking, like on planes, I travel a lot for work, or on vacation. Like, I'm always interested in, where do you come from? What do you do? And it
Yeah.
opens up a conversation. I've had people like on LinkedIn after find me from that conversation. I give them a business card. We end up doing millions of dollars of business together for the sole reason of, we just said hello and we're curious about what the other person does, and just liked the open dialogue, right? It's,
Yeah.
I don't understand the philosophy of people putting their head down, and I understand like real introverts and people have anxiety, and I understand that, but that the whole so much of the world has become just like, I have neighbors, I don't know their names.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up as a kid, I knew every neighbor, their kid, their son, their grandparents. Like, it was just different. Your neighbors were like an extension of your family that were there to help you in case you needed your lawn cut when you're on vacation. Where now it's just everybody puts their head down. I hope I don't make eye contact. the world's really different. And I think if people could find some sense of bringing it back to that, just giving a shit about other people, it'd be a different world.
The world does seem to lack some empathy these days compared to where it should be.
We could spend another 4 hours talking about that.
I completely agree. You've already given so much advice, but is there any like general piece of advice that you just wish everyone kind of knew?
Yes, everybody should put their kids in jiu-jitsu. That's number one, first and foremost. And from a self-defense perspective and a confidence perspective, because you and I just talked about introverts and extroverts, and I have seen, and this is probably pertains to any martial art, but I have seen grade nines come into my classes with their glasses on, looking at the ground, knowing they've just been bullied, and they become like high ranked in the military or presidents and CEOs. It's a different confidence booster with discipline, and that discipline translates and transfers, into life. Other than that, man, it's just, find out what you love. You see way too many, and I don't want to make this gloomy, but way too many are people getting sick. Way too many people, don't live a full life. Just live it to the fullest, man. If you can enjoy every day, be nice to everybody, and don't overextend yourself, but don't put everything you have under a mattress for a rainy day. Enjoy life because you don't know what's coming, and family is precious, and don't neglect that.
That sounds like a dozen pieces of fantastic advice. I just want to comment though. I was somebody who was bullied really badly when I was
Really?
young. I was bullied really badly. Even though I had had some martial arts, it didn't give me the kind of self confidence that I needed. And then when I got into wrestling, I started to be able to like have enough confidence to take care of myself, and that's brought me forward in the military. I got more confidence, and now I can be a leader and be confident and be a teacher and coach people. But yeah, I absolutely, as somebody who was bullied, feel very grateful that martial arts gave me that kind of confidence.
Yeah, I'll say for myself, I was never bullied, thank God. But the reason I started martial arts was because I was the flight risk, the fight or flight. I was my initial instinct, and it's nature versus nurture. You can't teach it. You're just born that way.
Yeah.
I hated altercation. I didn't like, things going on, and I was like, I need to overcome this, and I need to become more confident in that fight versus flight scenario. And I'm still not. I'm the first one to make sure everything is okay if there's something going on, but I still don't like it. But the instincts I've created through, what I call a second lifetime of martial arts is you can go handle the situation you don't like to be in versus I just won't go near that situation.
Yeah, I like calling it fight, flight, or freeze because I think that's often what ends up happening is people call it fight or flight and they don't think it's okay that they're freezing. It's like, no, it's actually okay that you're freezing. So now let's work you through that frozen panic and realize that you can handle yourself in a different way.
Absolutely.
What are you excited for in the future?
Man, that's a big question. I keep talking to my wife about. I'm obviously, you can notice from my name, I'm European descent. I'm from Croatia. I go there every summer for like 3 to 4 weeks. I have a lot of family there, and I love the coastline and the clear waters and how safe it is, and the mentality is probably the biggest thing. My future, I call it my Freedom 55. I'd like to be 6 months there at 55 doing some sort of consulting or virtual work. I don't I don't ever talk about retirement because I told you about, me needing to do something all the time. So
Yeah.
I've got to have my hands and feet into something. That'll probably always be a gym or two and maybe some sort of, distance consulting. In the next couple of years, I'd love to be able to buy a place there on the coast and spend, 6 months of the year there and then back here with the rest of the fam for 6 months. And I mean, like my kids will be at a university by that point, and then they're a little more self-sufficient. If they want to come, they can come, but
Yep.
that's kind of the plan.
That sounds like a wonderful way to live life. What do you have to promote?
Not a lot, to be honest. Hey, if there's anyone from Canada, I know Mike, you were on the broadcast, on the podcast not long ago, but we're having our RMNU, Hobson Mora, camp June 20th to 22nd. So love for people to come check it out. It'll be 3 wonderful days of gi and no gi jiu-jitsu. It'll be a blast. My gyms, Current BJJ in Mississauga and Revo Jiu-Jitsu in Burlington, Ontario. All of my partners that do a wonderful job when I'm absent because my life is crazy and hectic. But other than that, that's really it, man. Just a shout out to everybody who's listening to this. I hope you enjoy it and it made a little bit of a difference in your life.
I hope so too. I'm going to put all those things in the show notes so everybody's got links and can find it all, and including the stuff for the camp. Thank you so much for your time today, Toma. This was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, Eric. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about leadership, management, or gym ownership, feel free to reach out to Toma. If you find yourself near Ontario, Canada, find Toma for a role. You can find his contact information and websites in the show notes. And as always, thank you for your time and attention.